Welcome for joining us today. My name is Janet Yarrow. I'm professor of biology and the coordinator of Earth Day 2021 at Housatonic Community College. What a better way to celebrate Earth Day than to open up a conversation on the joys of gardening. For the gardeners out there, you know there's something very special about digging in the soil, getting your hands dirty, whether you're planting a flower or a vegetable seed. Watching it sprout into a living plant is pretty special. For those wanting to learn about gardening, you're in for a treat today. Our guest today is Dean Robin Avant, Dean of Academic Affairs at Housatonic Community College. We are honored to have her share her expertise on growing vegetable gardens. Dean Avant is an avid gardener and published author. Her book, The Spirt of Gardening, is an easy-to-read guide and resource for those interested in learning the basics of growing a vegetable garden. Welcome, Dean Avant.
Thank you.
It's my hope that this interview will inspire listeners to take to the soil and start planting their own food. Let's begin. Okay, here's the first question. Growing a vegetable garden in a large plot in the ground is optimal, but can you still grow vegetables if the only space you have available is a windowsill?
Absolutely. Is really getting you acclimated with space and making sure that you recognize you don't need a field, you don't need a backyard, you don't need all of those things. And if you have minimal space, how do you actually maximize? So whether it's using a pot or, a windowsill, indoor gardening is so key to gardeners. And you can do herbs, you can do anything that is what's called self-pollinating, and you can grow those right in your house, in a sunny side of your house, a sunny window, and you really can enjoy the growth of any type of vegetation that is what's called self-pollinating, as well as herbs, flowers, anything like that you can grow inside your house. So I don't want people to fear the space or believing that they can't garden because they don't have large areas outdoor. Urban gardening is exactly that, and it's really taking a smaller space and maximizing it for your biggest use.
Okay, so for windowsill gardening, if the only space you have is a windowsill, does it have to be sunny? Is that one of the
It's best to be. Yes, absolutely. Most of your crops, your typical crops, do need about 6 hours at least of sunlight. So you would want to watch that and realize if there is enough sunlight so that you can help that growth, that germination occur. And again, typically it should be 6 to 8 hours, but 6 hours as a minimum of sunlight production.
Okay, great. Yes, I grow some herbs on my windowsill, and I
Yes.
snip them off and I put them in my dinner.
Me too. And it's really awesome to do. It's inspiring, it's warming, and it feels wonderful that you're just doing that right in your own home.
Okay, great. Now, some people may want to start growing vegetables on a small deck or patio. I think this is called container gardening. What conditions are necessary for planting on a deck or a patio, and which types of vegetables do best in container gardening?
So what's interesting is it's really important to get familiar with seed packets. And seed packets will typically tell you if it's container friendly. That's a nice way to start looking at your seeds and really getting seeds that say container friendly. That's how you know that you can really grow them in pots, you can grow them in containers and really yield great production. The other piece with using a deck or patio is sometimes decks and patios have too much sun all day round, and that can be detrimental and it can really dry out the soil. You might need a little bit of shade at some points throughout the day. If you are doing a deck, so for instance, I have a lot of deck growth, and I do have to pull those pots to some of the shadier areas so that they do not overexpose or get sunburned. And you want to make sure that the soil is also used for potting soil. So there's different soil types, and you can read that up on the soil package. And some of them will say in ground or in pots or in beds, right? And so based on that, the nutritional value or what kind of chemicals we would say, right? Different chemicals or fertilizers or compost that's added to that soil mixture really does matter. So it's important to read labels, whether it's the label on your seed packet or the label on your soil package of what kind of soil you're purchasing. So on a deck, you can do anything really. You can do peppers, you can do tomatoes, you can do beans and peas, you can do herbs, you can do so many items that you would typically do in a garden bed or in a yard, right? And you just, again, you're watching the pot itself. Get a larger one. Many times we think of small little pots. You would want a or larger so that you can keep it growing. And then you add stakes to it so that they can grow up it. Sometimes you need to tie different crops so that they, you know, they don't hang and droop. And you really can do all types of actual herbs, again, vegetables. Some people even have lemon and limes, right, growing in pots on their decks. And you can pull some of these in if they're perennials that you want to grow year after year. You take that pot indoor when it gets into the winter time so that it doesn't freeze off. And then you go from there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Would you say container gardening requires more or less care than growing in the ground if someone doesn't have a lot of time?
Good to ask that question. Sometimes what happens with container growing, which we forget about, the actual organism, right? So this crop is using the nutrients from that soil. And over a course of weeks, you do have to replenish those nutrients in the soil. So many times you have to re-add soil, re-add nutrients back into the soil because you're in either a pot or a bed. When you have crops growing in the actual ground, that's constantly replenished with the decomposers of the ground, with the worm, and those are constantly helping in the cycle of nutrients. And that system or cycle is missing when you're in pots. So you would have to keep a bag of soil nearby and replenish and add to that soil over time.
Okay. But you still have the weeding, the watering as well.
Yes. So a lot of times if you have your soil in pots, you're going to remove a lot of that weeding and use of removing the weeds. But some gardeners grow with weeds and they actually allow it to just grow with each other as a real ecosystem, right? And some people don't fear that at all. Many new gardeners do, or sometimes the organized gardener that wants it clean and always kept neat. But there are so many gardeners or farmers that really allow everything to grow amongst each other and they don't really stay so clean and organized, and it's fine.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's something new I didn't know about. I weed a lot. Okay. So it's April now, and what should they be doing, you know, for if they're going to do a container gardening on their deck? Probably a lot of people are interested in doing that. I do container gardening on my deck as well as in the ground. What should they be doing now in April? Is there anything to be doing to preparing, or you still have to wait until it gets warmer out?
No, so April and even last month, green crops. Okay, so your lettuce, your kale, your Swiss chard, arugula, all of those green leafy vegetables are perfect right now because they like cool temperatures. And so when it gets too hot, they usually bolt or flower, and that means it's kind of at its end and it's going to seed. Or it becomes more bitter at those points. But really to have that fresh, crisp lettuce, it's time. Right now is the perfect time to having those growing. And again, you keep it with a little bit of shaded area or it will bolt quickly and go into flower. What happens is I use, because of the north Eastern location, I actually use Earth Day as a real marker day, as well as Mother's Day. And so Earth Day coming up April 22nd, and that's what we're celebrating right now. That's a good time frame for you to really start moving things, more warmer crops outdoor. Just be careful because our freeze dates can always trip us up, and it could freeze at night. And as soon as that happens, your warmer crops will be destroyed at that point. Mother's Day is a perfect marker where you know you can get your true warm crops, your different squashes, your tomatoes, your cucumbers really out, okay, and about and growing. Okay, but really I use the March time frame all the way up to Earth Day as having all your leafy greens growing. And you'll uncover a lot of herbs that are coming back, because you'll see those coming back, your mints, your chives, your thyme, you know, all of those will be coming back right now, and you can start uncovering those.
Okay, very good, great information. Let's move on to planting in the ground. The soil's
Sure.
warming up. If someone wants to start a vegetable garden in the ground, can you take us through the steps they should be taking right now?
Sure. So what I typically do is, if we can kind of go across like a year calendar, it's really nice if you have your ground being treated. And when I say treated, I'm not talking chemically, okay? In the fall, typically when all of the autumn leaves are falling down from the trees, a lot of people bag them up and get rid of them. I do the complete opposite. I take all my leaves and I lay it across all of the ground or beds that I'm going to use right now. And so the leaves are still there. And what happens is during the entire fall and winter season and early spring, you have all your microbes and your worms eating away at it. It becomes their food, and they're really munching it down. Right now, I'm starting to uncover those leaves, really looking at the rich dirt, the soil itself, and I'm recognizing that they did a great job over this winter. And so as I start pulling back, all of my perennials are actually coming through. So the herbs that continue to grow every year after each year, those should be unfolded, and really you could pull that back and start seeing those. As for if you did not start right during the fall, you would want to make sure that your soil is being checked, tested. If you're going to go right into the ground, you can do a soil testing. They have small kits that you can just purchase, or you can send them off to laboratories, your choice of expense. But just making sure that wherever you're going to grow does not have heavy metals, okay? Because we know that different metals are a part of soil as a whole, and you would never want to be exposed to that, as your crops will take that in, and then you would consume that. And so I would start with soil testing. So making sure that your pH, your soil composition, soil levels are okay to use. And then you would start actually turning that soil over, making sure that it's nutrient rich. And you might want to add your compost. If you've been composting, you can add those items into it. And then getting your soil beds ready, meaning if you're going to do rows and mounds, if you're going to build trenches in it where you actually add the water. And that goes over, you know, that's in this book as well, or you could simply research it and really understand where is the direction of the sun. Okay, so that you know that as you grow different crops, ones that are taller versus shorter, you don't want them to overshadow each other. And that's important to know before you just start planting. So right now is a critical time for mapping out or plotting your garden, the space of it, the soil, and what you would want to plant in each of those areas.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Now, what is the best way to decide what to plant? Do you plant because you like it, the vegetable, or do you look at your conditions and say, well, I need to plant due to these conditions?
Definitely, it's important to start with what do you like to eat, right? What do you actually like to have on your plate? And I think that's important because then that will dictate when in the season you can grow that. Okay. So right now you might say, I want cucumbers. Well, now's not the time to start a crop and you would really damage them too quickly. Hey, I really love lettuce. Okay, so then now is the time to get your lettuce in and let that grow. So I think it's always important to start with what does your family or household really enjoy eating? And then based on that type of food, you would want to research when is the appropriate time to sow that seed, how long does it take to grow, and then when you would be able to harvest it. Okay, because you just can't start a tomato plant in the winter unless you're indoor, of course. But you really want to make sure that your food option that you want is based on the climate and time frame of the season.
Right. Okay. So I'm having a plan going on in my head right now. Can you give us some guidelines on watering for windowsill, container, and in-ground?
Sure. Well, watering is critical. We know that the plant does need hydration and the soil, the microbes, etc. One thing that we do fail to think about is overwatering is detrimental. Okay, overwatering can create mold, mildew, other spores that are just not helpful for your soil. And drainage is important. You have to make sure that your containers that you're using or buying either has drain. If you're outdoor, typically a lot of people take the hose and they kind of spray right over the garden. And I've learned that to be not helpful for the plant as the sun, really hits its peak in time. And if there is still water remaining on the leaves, it can actually dry up and get sunburn. Okay. So it's really helpful to understand that the top of the crop usually doesn't need the water, it's the roots. And so watering underneath the crop. So if here's my plant, right at the base where the soil is, that's where you're watering. So that the actual roots are taking in the water. And so I like to make trenches along plants and you fill up those reservoir or trenches and the soil, the roots extract and take that water in for the plant, never above. And also it depends on your climate as well, but watering in the morning is very helpful or in the evening, but not too late. But morning or evening is really sometimes the best time frames, not midday when the sun is at its optimal and closest to the earth.
Okay. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be careful where you water.
Everywhere.
And how much you water as well. What about if on the windowsill? How often are you watering them? Do you wait for them to dry out?
Not too dry out, but a lot of plants do well with again, not the overwatering. So make sure that your soil is moist enough, but not saturated or too saturated where it's not draining properly. I think that's the biggest piece. That if you are not draining, it's keeping it too much, and you're going to end up having some mold growth and mildew, which you don't want because it really just brings on disease to the plant. So, not fully drying out where you can see cracks in the soil, nothing like that. I think just monitoring, kind of put your finger in and check how moist it feels. You want to make sure that, again, that draining is occurring.
Okay, great. Well, you spoke a little bit about weeding. I was going to ask you about that, but you said, you could leave weeds if you want. You could not leave weeds if you want. And so tell us about garden pests. How do you deal with garden pests if you're growing outdoors?
Absolutely. And I mean, you have pests from little guys, right? So little critters that are insects, different beetles that are really eating away, borers that are eating away, as well as pests such as animals. So you can have a lot of different interesting creatures. So they're also eating away too. I truly avoid any pesticides, insecticides. They're not good for your own individual health, for health of animals, children, environment. So I really avoid that, and I try to take some natural approaches. And one of the biggest ways for any critters that are large animals or rodents is really a fencing. Build some of those they could be very inexpensive. Roll out fences to, of course, designer fences, and really allowing that to be up and around your entire garden. What I do is I use the rollout fences, but the perimeter of my garden is actually growing with really aroma-based items. So mint and lavender, marigolds, all of those that are very perfume, pungent smells to a lot of our creatures and critters, and it almost keeps them away just naturally. Okay, so that's very helpful. Marigolds are very helpful for other insects and keeping those away. I think it's important as a gardener that you actually visit your garden daily and remove different pests off of it. If you leave those pests, they will invade, they will take over. You know, you really want flowers, you want all types of different items that are going to lure in and pull in the pollinators, which you do need. Sometimes having, you know, different grasshoppers, they may be okay, but there's a different species or two that are not, and they'll eat everything on there. So you want to really watch along the green leaf. Many times there's different inchworms or caterpillars that are going to grow, and they'll camouflage and look exactly like the color of the leaves. And you can really just remove those. And you want to monitor underneath leaves are important because you'll see a lot of eggs being created there. And so I use neem oil as another mechanism. You can use a soap. You can do a lemon-based soap. So many different natural solutions that you can use in the cleanup and removal of pests.
Okay, wow, a lot of options. Excellent.
Lots of options out there. And again, I'm strong in believing that we have so many options that we can use, and we can avoid the chemical-based, and when I say chemical, everything's a chemical, water is a chemical, but we want to remove those harsh chemical-based pesticides.
Right, excellent. I agree with that. Well, you've been very generous with your time and expertise, and I've got no doubt after listening to our conversation, many will be excited to start to grow their own gardens, whether it's windowsill or backyard. Let me show your book.
Thank you.
The Spirt of Gardening. It's fabulous. There's so many beautiful pictures in here. Easy to read. Wonderful, wonderful pictures. Can you see that? This is what it looks like. The Spirt of Gardening. Now, is there any parting words you'd like to share with us?
I think that have fun with it. Sometimes we look at it as it's too much. After all of that you just shared, that's too much to start. Start small, start big, whatever you see fit. Get involved. I think that's a big piece to gardening. It's a community, it's a social thing. And so a lot of people like to share crops, share seeds, share ideas. There's different workshops always for different members of the community. I think it's a time to bring your family together. It's a self-reflection time. It's a stress reliever, right? So I think there's so many different aspects of gardening and how it can really help your own well-being. As well as the environment. So get involved. And again, you can start indoor, outdoors. To me, it's a sustainable mechanism. It is something that we should actually learn as a skill set. Agriculture is a past for us, and we should really make it a current and a future.
Great. Now, in your book, you did say that there's no mistakes.
There isn't.
No mistakes. So if you want to start gardening, there's no mistakes. You just learn and you move on for the next year.
Yes, and you learn, you grow as you're growing your garden.
Right. It's great. Excellent information. Thank you so much for sharing this. And thank you to everyone who has joined us, and good luck in your planting. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.